Boom. What's going on, party people? So, you may not know it, but I'm a poet. See what I did there? That's seriously corny. But in all seriousness, I perhaps once in a while like to write a little bit of poetry. And I recently watched a video. This is a slam poetry thing. And it really kind of inspired me to just dabble with maybe writing a poem again. So I wrote a poem. It's kind of, I don't know if it's slam poetry. It's kind of just, it is a poem. This poem is about a guy named Bobby. And Bobby was my weed dealer when I lived on Capitol Hill back in 1994, 95. Met him in 94, and I don't know how long I knew him before he departed this world, but it wasn't very long. He had a somewhat tragic story. He was the only person that I ever knew who died as the result of marijuana. The only person that I've ever met in my life that died as a result of marijuana. Now, Bobby was a dealer, and he was flipping quite a bit of herbs, right? There was some guy that he had gotten into a beef with, and that guy sent a letter to the police department outlining the activity that Bobby was engaged in. This guy effectively created a situation where at some moment in the future, he was going to get a knock on the door from the police department, and they were going to investigate him for selling marijuana. And Bobby wasn't going to go to jail. He wasn't going to do years on an herb charge. He just wouldn't. And he had told me one time I don't remember exactly how we came across the subject, but he had told me one time that, he couldn't do jail. He wouldn't go to jail. So that guy wrote that letter, and then after Bobby had found out about this, he committed suicide in his apartment. And I was very saddened by that, man. And I don't just mean from a standpoint of losing my dealer. That did suck. But more than that, the world had lost a really decent teddy bear of a guy. Bobby was not a thug. Bobby was not a hardcore criminal. Bobby was this big sweetheart of a guy with a big old fat Buddha belly, and he wore glasses, and he kind of looked like half a dork, but me and him looked a lot alike at that time, so I looked like half a dork too. And he was just a very decent dude. And he left us too soon over some stupid bullshit. Over a guy writing a letter outlining that he was dealing herbs. And when I think about where we are 25 years later, it makes me sad that Bobby had to die over weed. It's the worst reason in the world to lose somebody is over marijuana, So this poem is dedicated to Bobby. Once upon a time, there was a guy whose life mission was to get you high. Weed he had in zips and bows. How many he'd flipped, nobody knows. 10,000 bags, I'm sure he would say. It was at least a few every day. Smokers who purchased would keep him high. A sweet side effect from people that buy. Want to smoke one? They always would say. Sure, what the fuck? I'm doing nothing today. Before they left, another on the way. This was the life of Bobby each day. When we met in the basement, he stayed. He made me an offer to help me get paid. And on that day, a weed plan was made. To flip mad sacks to all of the heads, pass him the cheddar, and earn me some bread. This is a tale about Capitol Hill and the hundreds of people that wanted to chill, who needed that herb to ease their mind. Best thing about Bobby, he had many kinds. Back to the Walgreens that I operated. Amongst the smokers, my weed was top rated. My man P screens the back door, and that shit's pretty funny. He won't let them in lest they show him the money. After that, come on in, you'd hear him say. Get that sack, smoke a bowl, and be on the way. As Snoop Dizzle would say, this type of shit happened every day. On Cap Hill, I served many sacks, and I tell no lies and only the facts. So now that I have told you the story of Bobby, I'm about to tell you the story of Bobby. Now that you've heard the poem, it'll make more sense. So I moved into this building on Capitol Hill with my ex-girlfriend, who I affectionately, it's not affectionate, that's sarcasm, people, who I call the Speed Queen. And she loved speed. Speed was her thing. Sometimes people are into certain things, right? And sometimes they'll trip you up into their shit because you want to try and swim with them. And you should know better than to fuck around like that. You should just leave them alone. But I had to make that mistake to learn the lesson. Believe me, I learned a valuable lesson. So selling weed was a trip, people. I got to tell you, I met many different kinds of people. I had weird situations. Selling weed was weird. I moved into this building on Capitol Hill with my ex, the Speed Queen. And then me and her moved out of that building. We moved into a trailer park in Arvada. But then she left me a couple weeks later. Now, I'm kind of thankful that she left me. I had been sending her the vibration that I didn't want to be with her for quite a while. And she had, up to that point, she was just not getting the memo. And I have also learned along the way that you're not done with a girl until that girl is done with you. And I suppose conversely for women, you're not done with a man until that man is done with you. Like if the other party just won't leave you alone or doesn't let you go, you're not done with them till they decide you're done with them, right? So I had decided I was done with this girl like 8 months before we finally broke up. But apparently we needed to go through that extra 8 months for her to get that memo and decide that we weren't going to be together anymore. And one day I came home to the shithole trailer that we had rented, and it was a crazy story. So me and her had rented this shithole apartment in 1135 Logan. Y'all can look it up on Google Maps. And now I can tell y'all that I know for a fact it's received a renovation since then. So the people who own 1135, don't sue me for slander or anything like that. At that time, 25 years ago, it was a total shithole. I have no idea what it looks like. It might be nice now. Might be completely renovated. I'd like to hope it is. So I was living down on Logan, staying in that building in a third floor apartment in the middle of summer, as hot as fuck. And it was cockroach infested, and it was disgusting. And it was fucking disgusting. It was the only thing that we could afford because me and Anna were broke as fuck because we were both addicted to speed and couldn't keep a job, and it was a total train wreck. The whole thing was a complete train wreck, right? So then we moved into the trailer. She left me a couple weeks later. I couldn't afford the trailer by myself. So I asked a couple of dudes that I had met when we were living in the building if I could move in with them in their apartment downstairs because I was going to school at the Institute of Art just a couple blocks from that building. And I needed a place to stay that I could afford that was cheap enough. And these guys were staying in a buffet apartment, a one-room apartment with a little tiny kitchenette on one end of it and a bathroom and a little tiny closet. You'd walk into the closet, then you'd walk into the bathroom. 3 of us were living in this room. 3 of us were staying in this apartment because all of us were kind of in various different situations that all had us broke as shit. So, like, my one roommate was paralyzed on the left side of his body because he had had a stroke, right? And then the other roommate was, I call him Master and Blaster, right? The stroke guy was Master. The other guy was Blaster. He was the body, right? The stroke guy was the brains of the operation. The other guy, Robert, was the body of the operation. And Robert would go out and get cigarettes. He'd get sodas, and he would do all the tasks like get us some food and things like that required walking. Because since the other dude couldn't walk anywhere and he didn't have a wheelchair, he didn't have a lot of the things that he needed to have. But this is how it was being broke as shit on Capitol Hill in 1994, right? Shit was hard. Shit was rough. So we were splitting the rent 3 ways. Now, the one thing that was really good about that is I'm pretty sure, I think we were paying about $226 a month or something like this for this place. It was really ridiculously reasonable. It was utterly affordable, right? It was really affordable splitting it with these dudes. So out of the kindness of their heart, they let me move into their place, and we started splitting the bills 3 ways, which was great because as 3 people that didn't have shit, that worked out really good. Now, my previous training had taught me that once I move into a location, I basically set up shop selling weed. That was my skill set, right? Criminals are like anything else. They will use the tools at their disposal to get paid. They don't have any other mechanisms to use. This is why I'm a big believer. If you're going to put somebody in prison, you must give them skills that fall outside the boundaries of being a criminal. Otherwise, the only skills they have is what they will fall back on once they return to the world. But I digress. Oh, yeah. So I was talking about how I met Bobby. So I moved in with those guys in their apartment, and I set up shop dealing some herbs, right? Because that's what I know how to do. I had been getting herbs from the landlord of the building. The guy that used to run the building that was the landlord was selling me weed. And he was selling it to me for, let's see, I think I was paying $80 an ounce, right? Something like that, $80 an ounce, which was pretty brutal because I had been, prior to that, I had been buying pounds. And I had been getting pounds, and I was used to paying a lot less than that. So he was really putting the screws to me, right, selling me this weed. And then the other thing was, because I was at the stage in the dealing game where I had to constantly come back like every other day for another ounce. Now, ironically, this is a way to work your way up the dope ladder, right? Is if you're buying too much weight off of somebody that can't handle you, the dealer upstream of them might actually ask to meet you. So one day I go to buy another ounce from him, and he goes, "Hey, my guy wants to meet you." And I was like, "Really?" And he goes, "Yeah, you're buying too much weight off me, and he doesn't want to fuck around, doing this ounce thing constantly with me, and so he wants me to send you to him." And I was like, "Really?" He goes, "Yeah, he lives in the basement." So this entire time I had been buying weed from my landlord, who was buying weed from the dude in the basement, right? This is how the weed game used to work, people. The weed game used to be very middleman. It was all about being a middleman to somebody. That's how the weed world turned back then. So he said he's down in the basement, apartment 10. So little did I know, I had been living 45 feet from this guy's door, selling weed. And without a doubt, this was problematic. Whenever weed dealers overlap in one building like that, it's very problematic, right? Because whatever the other dealer is doing and the way that they're doing it totally influences what you can do or get away with and how much heat or attention it's drawing, right? Because now you're doubling up the traffic. Each of you has your own weed customers coming in and leaving every day, right? Problematic. So I go down to Bobby and I knock on the door. Bobby opens the door. And I'm like, "Hey, man, I used to go by my other name, my secret name. I used to go by my secret gangster name that only my friends know." I'm like, "Hey, man, I'm gangster name." And Daryl upstairs sent me to see you. And he goes, "Oh, yeah, man. Yeah, come on in. He invites me inside and we hang out and we smoke some weed for a minute. And he was just super cool, right? He was really laid back. He was very easygoing. Although he displayed all the paranoia that dealers have. Dealers are very paranoid about meeting other new people that they've never met or that they can't vouch for. The only thing that Bobby knew about me was that I was buying way too much weight off of Daryl, and he was tired of dealing with Daryl on this piecemeal shit. He wanted to just serve me a bigger, fatter sack that involved less work. Which was great, because that was exactly what I wanted to do. Is I wanted to step to what I used to call, no, I don't want to reveal what I used to call it, because that would be OPSEC. I moved into buying a quarter pound from Bobby, right? And then eventually I moved to buying a pound. I'm pretty sure I moved to buying a pound pretty quickly after buying a quarter pound. And what was really cool was that during that meeting, Bobby tells me, so look, here's what's going to happen, man. I'm going to start throwing all my small fish to you. I'm going to start sending all my small fries your direction, man, because I don't want to deal with them. I don't want to have to serve them. I don't want to have them coming in and out. I don't need the traffic. It's too much. I can't deal with it. He says, I only want people that want a quarter pound or above, period. And I was like, bet, no problem, Bobby, tight. And I was like, okay, cool. So in that one meeting, Bobby had now set me up. This was some straight up Grand Theft Auto shit. Bobby had now set me up into getting a better deal on the weed, buying it at bigger volume, having direct access to the guy that had the weed instead of going through a middleman who was doing a pass-through. Pass-through is where you give them the money, then they give you the weed back at a later time. Pass-through is the worst kind of situation because you don't get to see the product until you've already paid for it, right? Which is some fucked up shit. Either way, so now Bobby had set me up into business with all these people that were going to start coming to me, man. So very shortly after that, we were now officially in the weed dealing business. Now, the funny part was right after that, we had managed to pick up a fourth roommate. Let's just call him P. We'll just call him P for this story. And P had some former criminal experience. He was brilliant. He was more seasoned as a criminal. And what I loved about him is he had criminal sensibilities, right? He had the ability to operate as a criminal without messing it up, without fucking it up. And if you're going to be a criminal, at least be that kind of criminal. So yeah, my man P was pretty sharp. And what I loved about P is he was hilarious, right? He had already been a distributor of pharmaceuticals. And so he was already very seasoned in the game, right? So it was very common for people to come to our back window and knock on our window, and then they would go to the door and somebody would let them in the back door. So that somebody would be P. P would go to the door and he would say, "Do you got money? Show me the money." And he would make them show him some money. Right? If you did not have money, he wasn't even going to let you into the building to waste my time. This is what I loved about P. He was no nonsense. He was the most perfect criminal that I ever met as far as just being well-versed in criminal OPSEC and his trade craft as a criminal, right? I respected him. Once they showed him the money, he would let them in. They would come in and they would buy a bag. And inevitably, the best part about selling weed to people is that every person who would buy a sack would offer to smoke a bowl with you. They were just so glad to have somebody that would sell them weed that was straight up, where you could just pay them and they had the bud and they would just put it right in your hand, right? Believe it or not, that was harder to find than you might think. A lot of dealers were pass-through dealers. Give me your money. I'll go see the guy. I'll buy the bag. I'll bring it back to you. I'll give it to you, right? With some sort of surcharge or tax involved in that transaction that pays to cover the expenses of it, right? Like, I don't expect people to do shit for free. I never did. I didn't sell weed as a public service. I did it, because I wanted to smoke buds for free. So we started having all kinds of people coming and going. We started flipping all kinds of bags. We were doing really well. The Walgreens was doing really, really well. And my roommate that was paralyzed, I made him an offer. So I was going to college at night from 6 to 10 p.m. So every day from 5:30 until 10:15, 10:20, I was gone. But the deal that I made to my roommate, man, is you sell weed while I'm not here, and all you got to give me is a certain amount that covered the cost of the weed. I let him keep all of the profit from any bag that he sold. I only needed the cost of the bud, right? So that was a very good deal for him since he was actually handicapped and couldn't get a job and he couldn't leave the apartment. Selling herb for me when I was not there was actually a really good deal for him as well. So we did that for quite a while. That actually worked out really good for quite a while, man. We were quite successful. We sold quite a bit of weed. And then a crazy event happened. So one day, my man was in the kitchen cooking some steaks, the guy that was handicapped. He was in the kitchen cooking some steaks on the stove. The steaks were from a guy named Captain Klepto. That was another funny thing is that when I say the dealin' bud was a lot like Grand Theft Auto, I'm not kidding. There was a lot of people that had what I call gangsta nicknames. Or sometimes we would give you a gangsta nickname because it was easier to remember you that way rather than remember your name. So I had a couple of customers, man. One was named Weasel Boy. The reason we called him Weasel Boy is because he had fucked up teeth, right? He had fucked up teeth that looked like he could eat right through some wood. He had some fucked up teeth that looked like he could straight up just shred stuff. I don't know, man. His shit was fucked up. And so we called him Weasel Boy, right? And of course. And then we had this other dude named Captain Klepto. Now, Captain Klepto, you may have already guessed what his specialty was. But Captain Klepto used to go to the Queen Supers. Queen Supers is the King Supers on Capitol Hill. Y'all know which one I'm talking about. Y'all know which King Supers I'm talking about. If you're from Denver or around Denver, y'all know Queen Supers. You know which one I'm talking about, right? So he would go up to Queen Supers and he would shoplift meat out of their case. It was amazing that he would get away with that. And he claimed that the secret was his boldness, right? He claimed that he would just walk right in there, walk up to the meat case, grab some shit, and on the way he was walking out, he'd stuff the shit in his coat, and then he would leave. He would not mill around. He would not eyeball anything. He would not shark. Sharking is where somebody circles something that they're going to steal. He would not shark on something at all, right? He would go straight in like a laser beam, grab it, and walk straight the fuck out. And what was interesting was that to people that didn't know any better, it was almost like he walked in, didn't find what he was looking for, and left immediately, right? That's how it appeared to people. So Captain Klepto would steal steaks from the Queen Supers, and then I would give him 50% of their tag value in marijuana in trade, which was a smoking deal for him and me. We were all broke as shit, and we couldn't afford all this meat. But Captain Klepto would bring us all this fucking great meat, and we would trade weed for that, and we would eat. And that really helped to stretch all of our dollars because we were not making very much money. Like none of us had very much money. And all of that stuff made a big difference. So my homeboy's in the kitchen cooking some Captain Klepto steaks from Queen Supers. He's got the door cracked to let a little bit of air in because there's, it's kind of smoking in the kitchen a little bit. And all of a sudden, this motherfucker just pushes the door open and just pushes my homie right into the room with all the rest of us. And I was right in the middle of taking a big bong rip when they walked in. And I remember I pulled the bowl out of the bong and I took it in and I blew it out. And I said, "Can I help you?" And that was when they announced to me that they were investigating that there might be a baggie for sale. Him and 3 other dudes walk up in there and they're plainclothes detectives, probably narc cops, right? But these guys walked in and now, mind you, this was 1994. They were wearing like windbreakers and they had belly bags. And this one dude had his belly bag open with his badge and his gun and all this. And, they walked in and right away, they just sat us all down on the couches and, they let us know that they were there to investigate that maybe we had been selling a little baggie, something like that. Maybe we had some little baggies for sale. And it's funny because that was the way he put it too. He was like, so we might have some information says maybe you're dealing some little baggies out of here. Anything like that going on? Any little bags or anything moving out of here? And Many things went in my favor that day, but one of them was the fact that they seated us all in the same room. So I said to the investigator, I said, man, if we were dealing drugs, do you think we would live in a shithole like this? Implying that if we had drug money, we would be living in a better apartment, because the place was a shithole. It was the worst shithole you could possibly imagine. He sort of mentally went touche. You know what I mean? He didn't say touche, but he kind of nodded his head as though, that's a fair answer. He goes, so you mean to tell me that if we look around this apartment, we're not going to find any marijuana? And I said, well, to be completely honest with you, you're going to find stems and seeds and, the remnants of marijuana, but you're not going to find any marijuana that you could smoke, really. If we had that, we would be smoking it. And so there was some weed on a tray. It was just a little bit of weed, right? It was just maybe 1.5 grams of weed, something like that. It was very small on a tray, and it was broken up, and that's what we were smoking out of the bong. And I said, you're going to find stems and seeds, but you're not going to find any smokable weed besides this. He goes, we got reports of a lot of people coming and going over here. What's going on there? And right at that moment, his partner asked me, what's y'all's phone number? And I said, we don't have a phone. We can't afford a phone. I said, so, if you want to talk to us, you have to come over and see us in person. And I said, my friend who's paralyzed here has a lot of folks that come over and see him to offer him moral support and hang out and just talk to him. And, and so we have quite a few people that do that. And he goes, well, do you want to flush this weed? And I said, I don't want to flush that weed, but in lieu of the alternative, I will flush that weed. And we went into the bathroom, and I put this weed in the toilet, and I flushed the flush handle, and we both watched it spiral down into the vortex of water and disappear down the drain. And we both walked back out into the main room, and part of the reason that they didn't want to disassemble our apartment was because it was so fucking gross. It was so disgusting, right? There's 3 guys crap, and it was disgusting, and it was nasty. And they didn't want to dig through our shit, right? It was gross. And I think that they realized that there was so many cockroaches and shit like that a dope dog would probably refuse to smell that apartment. A dope dog would probably run from that apartment before it would smell it, right? Because it had to smell. If a dog can smell 100,000 times stronger than a human, it had to smell terrible. That's all I can say. So we went back into the main room and we sat down. One of the many things that played out right that day was that they ran my roommates for warrants. And Robert had a warrant for, of all things, having an unlicensed dog in Denver. And then he had a failure to appear on the ticket for having an unlicensed dog. And he went to jail on the failure to appear. So they took Robert that day. And then my other man, he ended up having a warrant, but somehow it didn't come back for him. And somehow they didn't run me for warrants. I don't know why they didn't run me for warrants. God was looking out for me. That was one of those days that the universe was just looking out for me, man. They didn't run me for warrants. As a result of that, the cops said the following: there probably is something going on here, but don't make us have to come back and find out what it is. We could have kicked in the door today. We could have had all you guys face down. Everybody could have went to jail. We didn't do that. If there is something going on here, it stops today. He gave us our IDs back. They turned around and they walked out the door. They had officially warned me like they were the fucking mob. And they were not playing. Moments after they walked out, I told my roommate, who was handicapped, I had to get out of there for a minute. My heart was pounding and I wanted to get out of there because I was afraid that they might just turn around, come right back and snatch us up. My man felt the same way. Even though he was handicapped, he wanted to get the fuck out of there. We ended up walking a couple blocks. We just kind of, left the place for a while and circled the block and came back. And I knew at that moment that something was going to have to change, right? So we continued to run the Walgreens, but at a lower scale after that. And not too long after that happened, my roommate pulled a really stupid stunt where he ended up doing some methamphetamines with the guy that lived in the front apartment of the building. And after 24 hours of staying up on methamphetamines, they decided it was going to be a great idea to steal some of the money that I had out of the money locker, if you will, in our room to go get some more meth. They tried a really stupid plan to distract me, and their plan was very dumb, and they were both acting very suspicious and tweaked out, and I totally saw through it because I used to be a tweaker, right? So I totally knew what tweaking looked like. And I basically busted the handicap dude in my money, taking money. And I knew at that moment that I was going to have to shut everything down and that I was going to have to move on. I was going to have to figure out a new situation and move on. So that effectively was the end of the weed dealing on Capitol Hill story. It was never the same after the cops came in and shook us down. And then shortly after that, my roommate fucked it all up and I had to shut the store down and move out anyway. It was a crazy story, people. That was the closest I ever came to being busted for dealing marijuana. In the 17 years that I dealt weed, that was the closest. Made me learn a valuable lesson. Really did. All right. Done a lot of jaw jacking. I got so much other stuff, but I think I'm going to leave that for another time. I think it's time to celebrate living. I think it's time to sit down and chill and make the fire light, as Bob Marley would say. All right, people. Thank you. Thank you for being my listeners. Thank you for being here with me. Please like and subscribe, share, tell your friends about it, and I will see you next time on the Matt Mettler Podcast.
The Matt Mettler Podcast is a Matt Mettler production. Copyright 2019.